So I was looking through some of my past comments that I get on different cameras, especially newer entry-level cameras that I've reviewed, and I get a lot of comments saying, whoa, slow down, I don't understand, what are you talking about when I'm referring to a certain type of equipment or a method or anything like that. So it got me thinking, you know, a lot of the information I take for granted as a professional photographer is the real basics, which I knew nothing of when I first started. So that brings me to this video, which is going to be the complete Noob's Guide to Photography. This video is going to be pretty long, so I am going to make it, first I'm going to make it ad-free so you guys don't get ads popping up all the time. Some of my content now is going to be ad-free, particularly these longer format educational videos, because I don't want ads popping up and interrupting the learning experience. So if you want to support this ad-free content, feel free to check out the link in the description where you can do so, but don't feel like you have to. I'm not doing this for the money, I'm doing it because I love it and I want to help you guys out. So getting into the meat of things, or veggie burger, whatever you prefer, we're going to split it up into sections like camera gear, aperture, shutter speed, ISO, composition, everything you need to know when buying your first DSLR or mirrorless camera that you want to start taking over in manual. Now before we start off this video, I want to confirm a couple of things. One, I'm not sponsored by any camera company. At the moment I shoot Sony as my main professional kit, and I have a Fuji also. I switched originally from Nikon to Sony, but these days any camera brand has a really good camera, you know, Canon, Nikon, Panasonic, Fuji, Sony, anything. So I'm really not going to be biased towards any camera brand when we're talking about gear. Secondly, I'm bound to make some mistakes in this video being such a long format. If I do, I will correct them in the comments or the description, so check those and look out for any updates or anything like that. And lastly, this information is, especially pertaining to camera gear, is relevant as of the 13th of April 2021. So with that all being said, let's jump into it. So first things first, you're deciding to buy a camera. Maybe you're just using your cell phone for a long time now and you want to pick up your game and buy a new camera. You can't decide whether you want to get a DSLR or a mirrorless. I'll touch on what those are in a minute. And it's just really overwhelming to try and figure out what the budget is and what you're going to spend. So let's talk about camera gear. The first thing I'm going to recommend is going to a proper camera store. I always go to Auckland Camera Centre, which is here in Auckland, New Zealand. They really know their stuff, and they also are not sponsoring this video, by the way, but I buy everything there. And when you go into a store like that, as opposed to a big box store, they're really going to know what they're talking about. Well, you would hope so. And they'll give you real information, and it's a much easier way to choose a camera for yourself. That being said, first thing that most people ask me when they're looking at buying their first camera is, how much is this, how much is that? So budget is something you're really going to want to figure out before you jump into this. And not so much what you want to spend, but maybe just what your cap is, what the maximum amount of money you want to spend is. And then any honest camera supplier store, and I will tell you today what you maybe don't need and what is going to be overkill. So firstly, the difference between DSLRs and mirrorless cameras. Now, DSLR stands for Digital Single Lens Reflex Camera. Taking all that jargon out of the way, it just means it has a mirror inside the body of the camera that flops up and down every time you take a photo. So when you're looking through the viewfinder, which is this little doohickey here, you are looking down through a mirror like a periscope and out the lens. The only difference between that and a mirrorless camera like this one, there's no mirror at all. You're just looking straight. I mean, in this case, you're looking at the camera's shutter, but you're just looking at the camera sensor. There's no mirror in the way. So that's the main difference between a digital SLR and a digital mirrorless camera. Now, as to which one you should buy at this point in time in 2021, I will say DSLRs seem to be on their way out. Saying that though, you can still buy a DSLR camera cheaper than you can buy a mirrorless camera. But there are a lot of benefits to mirrorless camera, especially nowadays that the technology has evolved quite a lot. So if you're thinking about deciding on which one, if budget allows, I would generally suggest to go for a mirrorless camera these days. But yeah, an SLR is going to be perfectly fine. It just really comes down to what you want to do. So mirrorless cameras, for example, have great benefits when it comes to doing video work. They have really great focus systems like eye tracking focus, which this camera I'm filming on now is doing. When it's filming me, I can see it has a little box around my eyeball and it's tracking me as I move in and out and side to side. Some of the benefits to mirrorless cameras over DSLRs are the size. They are generally a lot smaller than SLRs, not always the case. This is, for example, a Sony A9, and I wouldn't call it a small camera, but it's a lot smaller than what you would compare its SLR equivalent to, like a Canon 1D or a Nikon D5 is kind of what this camera is aimed at, and it's a lot smaller than that. Size is not only down to mirrorless though, you can also get into sensor size like crop sensor or full frame, which is a term you would have heard of a lot. So that's the next thing we're going to be talking about, is sensor size. Now this is a big thing when it comes to price, size of camera, quality of image, and all that kind of stuff. Generally, a lot of people that are just getting into photography and want to have a body that you can hold properly and has dials to change settings and things like that, a crop sensor camera is going to be perfectly fine. You can go and get a full frame if you want to, but we'll get into the benefits here in a second. But when people are referring to crop sensor or full frame, they're purely talking about the size of the image sensor. So this is a full frame camera. They call it a 35mm is the other term for it. And a crop sensor camera is about 1.5 times smaller than a full frame camera. You can get smaller than that again, like a micro 4/3 camera is a really popular option these days, with Panasonic and Olympus making some really good options.
Okay, so first up you've got your entry-level micro 4/3 is your Panasonic. So it's a micro 4/3 sensor in there. A little bigger, you come over to a Fuji. Now this is the XE4. This would probably be one of the more... Should I say less expensive? That sounds better than cheap.
Like it has the same sensor as XT4.
It does, yeah.
But much smaller and maybe a little bit less functionality.
A little bit more of a rangefinder style and less buttons and all that sort of stuff to customize.
They look pretty awesome too.
They're nice. And then over here the A7C, which is what, you're filming on that now, eh?
Yeah, I'm filming on A7C right now.
So that's the entryest level full
So if
frame.
we put them all together, hopefully you can see the actual physical size difference. So small, medium, large. You can also go bigger than full frame, which might sound a bit funny, but you can get a medium format sensor, which is much larger than a full frame again. So with that being said, we know about the physical size differences. Let's talk about the benefits to each. So firstly, with full frame, you've got a bigger sensor, which means you're gathering more light. Generally, you have more surface area per pixel. So if you have a 12 megapixel full frame camera and a 12 megapixel crop sensor camera, each pixel on the full frame is going to be larger, allowing more light. So when you're outside at night, for example, you can shoot in darker environments with a larger sensor and get less grainier images. Now, a lot of these rules are kind of generalizing. It is usually the rule, but there are some minor exceptions depending on the camera equipment and the technology used. The next one is going to be what most people are thinking about, and that is depth of field. So depth of field doesn't technically change between sensor size, but what I'm talking about is perceived depth of field, what it looks like on the actual image. So if you have the same framing, say this frame here that I'm filming myself, and you look at the background, if I was to film myself with an f2 lens on a crop sensor camera with the same view and an f2 lens with the same view on a full frame camera, the background is going to look blurrier with the full frame camera. That's just the fact of it. If you want a blurrier background, generally speaking, you're going to need a bigger sensor. There are other factors that control that as well, but that is one of the benefits behind using a full frame camera. Now, there are much more benefits to a full frame, but we don't need to get into all of them right now. They will eventually reveal themselves to you as you go ahead with this video. A benefit of a crop sensor camera is they're generally quite a lot smaller, including the lenses, and they're also usually a lot cheaper than a full frame option. Again, there are some exceptions, but for example, you can get a really nice little Canon DSLR with a couple of lenses for about $800. where, you know, this camera, I mean, this again is a little bit of an exception because this is one of Sony's best cameras. This body alone is about $6,000 New Zealand dollars, and the lens I have on here is about $3,000, I think. So, you know, just this combo is a lot more expensive, and I don't think you can even buy a crop sensor camera for half the amount of this with a lens. But generally speaking, crop sensor cameras are much, much cheaper and much smaller. So a lot of professionals use Fuji cameras like an X-T4, you might have heard that name, and they have much, much smaller lenses, much lighter, smaller bodies, and they also have really amazing sensor quality. So you can get really amazing image quality with those cameras also. It's really not going to matter at the start when you're buying a camera because your skills aren't going to be up to the par, and you're never going to get to the stage where you need something like this until you're much further along in your journey. You know, for example, me being a professional, whatever that means to you, and, you know, shooting a lot and getting paid for my work, I'm pretty confident I can use a entry-level crop sensor camera on like a family shoot, for example, and get a really good end result. But giving someone really new this camera is probably just going to confuse the situation and not necessarily going to make any better photos. So it really comes down to your skill, and I wouldn't suggest going out and spending thousands and thousands on a professional kit when you're just starting out. So lens choices, you have two main categories that I'm going to put you in. One is a zoom lens and one is a prime lens. Now the only zoom lens I own is on my camera right now, which is this Tamron 17 to 28mm. Otherwise, I just use prime lenses, and that's just a personal preference. Now the main difference is a prime lens doesn't zoom in and out. So this is a 50mm lens, and it's fixed at 50mm. I can't zoom in or out. If I want to zoom in or out, I got to use my feet and physically move forward or move back. The benefits to a prime lens is they're usually a better quality image, not always, especially nowadays with new technology, but they're usually a fast aperture, which means a bigger opening. So this is a f1.2 lens, which you cannot buy in a zoom lens. If I close the aperture, you can see it closing up there. So, and I look upside down in it so you can still see my face. So that is a 0.95 aperture with this particular lens, and that is like f16. So that's f16. f0.95. What that means again is, you know, a wider aperture, which is a bigger hole, means more blurrier background, better low light abilities. To some people, a more pleasing image, but that's just subjective. That's down to your individual taste. But that's usually what you get with a prime lens versus a zoom lens. The other obvious benefit to a zoom lens is that you have a zoom lens, so you can zoom in and out and change your composition on the fly. But it's just a personal preference, and I suggest again going into a camera store and checking out the different options you have available to you. There's a whole bunch of options, and I'm going to take you guys into Auckland Camera Centre and show you the whole range that you can go over, and we're going to do that now. Alright, so here we go. We're going to head off to Auckland Camera Centre, and we're going to go over a bunch of cameras they have in stock and show you guys the range of things that you can buy. I'm pretty sure they have most of the cameras anybody could really be looking at, with a few odd exceptions. So anyway, let's head out to Auckland Camera. So here we are in Auckland Camera Centre. This is James, Mel, Bud, and yeah, these guys have pretty much everything that you could want to buy in all price brackets, right?
Yeah, we do.
We're going to split it up into kind of categories, and then we will show you the really expensive pro stuff as well, so you can see what you might be looking at in the very, very distant future. So we're going to start with the very entry-level cameras and DSLR and mirrorless options. So yeah, let's do it.
So I'd say that the lowest budget one's probably going to be more like in your Nikon DSLR range, as well as your Canon DSLR range. The first one to look at would probably be maybe your Nikon D3500, which is here. You get a nice little 24 megapixel body and an 18 to 55mm lens, and that's $749.
Right.
Really, really good for just learning on, adapting your craft, becoming a bit creative with it.
And then you've got D5600, which is pretty similar, right?
The next step up, but you can do a little bit more with that in terms of video capabilities. All right, well, so Canon option, you'd be coming over here, and you'd probably start at... There are two cameras before this one. So there's the 3000D and then there's the 1500D, and those basically are the most entry-level ones for about that $500 to $700 price range. However, if you want a little bit more of an upgrade, go to the 200D. That's going to get you better sensor, better focusing, but you're going to get the same lens for around $1,097.
So far we're looking between $750 and $1,000. And that gets you a real basic entry-level camera. I mean, if you want to get a DSLR, and the cheapest kind of entry-level body you get, it's going to be an SLR, right?
Yeah, and they're all 24 megapixels, so there's tons of resolution to play with as well. They don't go to the extremes of some cameras, but they're pretty good.
Yeah,
pretty good.
If we were going to go mirrorless, and we're stepping up the budget a little bit, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
So show me what you would show someone coming into a camera store.
The first one that comes to mind in the mirrorless is probably the most popular one that we sell in store, and it's a Panasonic G85. Now you can pair this with any lens you want in the Panasonic range. However, there are some kit options such as the 14 to 42. If you wanted a twin lens kit, you've got the 14 to 42 and the 45 to 150. The best one of the bunch though, I believe, is the 12 to 60, because that's going to get you a little bit more into that telephoto zone.
And that's with a body and a lens.
Body and lens for 1157. It's probably the best one. So that's your G85. So that is a 20 megapixel sensor, micro 4/3. And if you pair it with a 12 to 60 lens, you've got 24 to 120, as I've said. The best thing about this camera, especially in the micro 4/3 range, is it's immediately got image stabilization built into the body. So your images in video are already going to be pretty stable.
And I can vouch for Panasonic's image stabilization. It's very, very good. And it's even better than my Sony professional full frame cameras.
Yeah.
So Panasonic are really good for video also.
With this one as well, like the G85, I think it's really good for families to start out taking pictures of their kids and stuff like that. You can get a beautiful little lens for it, which is a 25 1.7. Really, really cheap. It's just $260.
If we get a full frame and a crop sensor out and actually show the different size of sensors.
Should we do the Sony one then?
Yeah. So get a Sony, because Sony. And then get a Fuji
one.
Like X-T4.
Fuji's like the cult classic everyone loves.
Yeah.
Like Fuji because of its color.
Yeah.
The dials, everything.
And
It's like
just
a
fun to use.
big old throwback to film. It's really cool. Okay, so first up you've got your entry-level micro 4/3 is your Panasonic. So it's a micro 4/3 sensor in there. A little bigger, you come over to a Fuji. Now this is the XE4. This would probably be one of the more, should I say less expensive? That sounds better than cheap.
Like it has the same sensor as X-T4.
It does, yeah.
But much smaller and maybe a little bit less functionality.
A little bit more of a rangefinder style and less buttons and all that sort of stuff to customize.
They look pretty awesome too.
They're nice. And then over here the A7C, which is what you're filming on that now, eh?
Yeah, I'm filming on A7C right now.
So that's the entryest level full
So if
frame.
we put them all together, hopefully you can see the actual physical size difference. So small, medium, large. But price-wise, we're looking at quite different options, right? So just bodies alone, that's what, 1,000?
About 1,000, yep.
It's like 1,300.
14.
And that's
28.
2,800.
29, yeah.
So you're stepping up a lot in price going to full frame, and then you're also stepping up a lot in price when buying full frame lenses.
Yes.
But they all have manual functionality.
Manual functionality, all shoot RAW, all shoot JPEG, all do video.
We are looking at entry-level cameras, but some of these are really, really solid cameras. Like the XE3, if it came down to it, XE4, if it came down to it and my camera, my Pro A9 camera broke, and I only had an XE4, I'd be totally happy to shoot that at a wedding and still get really, really good results. Yeah. So can you show me the difference physically between a 85mm full frame lens and an 85mm equivalent crop sensor lens? So like the 56 Fuji.
56 Fuji.
And like this, just so we can see the size comparison.
Yeah. And a micro 4/3, I can show you the 42.5.
Yeah, okay, cool. Let's do that. Sweet. So now we're going to get the 85mm lenses. They're all different in terms of actual millimeters printed on the lens, but they all have the same field of view, which is 85mm. And we're getting the flagship lens, which means the best lens from each brand in that category. Right, so like I said, we've got the 85mm focal length or equivalent in each camera. So full frame, crop sensor, and micro four thirds. So prices we've got, and this is a little bit backwards because usually a micro four thirds lens would be cheaper than a crop sensor, but this one is a Leica design lens, like James said, and it is a little bit more expensive. So we've got $2,000 for the micro four thirds, $1,600 for the Fuji crop sensor, and then $2,500 for the Sony full frame lens. And you can get even more like this. The Canon full frame one is a lot more expensive, right?
Oh yeah.
It's like $4,000 or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then you also have aftermarket options, right?
Mm-hmm. You do indeed.
Like Sigma. These are all lenses for Sony.
Yeah.
And lenses for Canon and Nikon. So the other thing I wanted to touch on was if you're coming to a camera store and you may have an idea about what you want to photograph, like say if I wanted to photograph my kids, what lens would you recommend?
You go with a 35 equivalent or a 50mm equivalent. I think they're both nice portrait prime lenses.
Yeah.
If you're looking at kids that are going to run everywhere, then maybe just stick to a nice standard zoom, like a 24-70, 18-55, 16-50 if you're looking at the Sony.
So you're saying around that 16 to 50 range is pretty good.
Yeah, well,
for most stuff. Yeah, I would agree with that because I think if I was going to tell someone to buy an entry-level camera, I'd say get it with the kit lens, which is usually an 18-55 or something like that, and then get another lens on the side that's like a prime lens, like a 35mm or a 50mm or something like that. So one thing we were just talking about is second-hand options. A lot of camera stores like this one, and obviously online and stuff like that, you can get second-hand equipment, and there's nothing really wrong with that, especially if you come to a place like this where they still have warranties for all that kind of stuff. So for example, all of this stuff in these cabinets is all second-hand, and they all still come with a warranty. These guys warranty all of the options available. The Nikon Z6, which is a full frame mirrorless camera, that's $2,400. And it still comes with a 3-month warranty. The A7 III for $2,500, hardly used. $1,000 for an XE3, which is really great. Lots of Canon options as
Canon
well.
800D in here for $499 right now.
Canon 800D, really great entry-level example. Comes with a lens, and it's $499 with a warranty. So that, and I know that camera is going to be really good for, just about anything. And still, until you start getting into like wildlife photography or sports or whatever, then it's still going to be able to do it, but you're going to have to work a lot harder, and that's when you may need to upgrade.
Once you get a niche, once you have that passion of what you want to actually do, these ones are fantastic to learn on, and you can pretty much do everything with them. If your love is astro, get a 2.8 lens and maybe get a camera with a larger sensor later on down the line, but you can learn on this.
So now I'm vlogging with the 14mm 1.8 Sigma at 1.8 as well. See what it looks like. That's full arm length. Looks pretty cool.
He's distracted.
What I was saying and before when we were back home was that you really want to decide on the max amount of money you can spend, right? Before coming to decide. I mean, feel free to come in, have a look at the options, talk to these guys, and maybe then you'll be able to set your budget and what you kind of want to spend. But it's definitely a good idea to come in with an idea of what you want to spend, including things like a camera bag, memory cards, what else? Filters, tripods. So
spare batteries if you want to have more space. That's good.
Yeah.
Even a cleaning kit, something like that, because your camera will need maintenance. It will need some upkeep.
Sweet. So I'm gonna walk out the store and pretend that I don't have this lens on the camera, and that's pretty much it. We're gonna head back home and we'll finish off the video back in the studio. And we're back in the studio. So there you have it, guys. They were really helpful, and I'm pretty impressed by James's on-camera performance, seeing as they didn't even know I was coming in to make a video. I literally just went in there and said I wanted to make a video to show you guys the options available, and we did it, and now I'm back home after some McDonald's. If we just sum this whole video up into, what camera you should buy, there's really no one answer, which is probably not very helpful, but the main thing you need to do is figure out what kind of money you want to spend. So if we're talking New Zealand dollars, because I'm in New Zealand, I'll put US dollars in the equivalents up here or something, so you guys can see the difference. But if we were to split it into different categories, we're looking from around $750 to you know, say an even $1,500 for a really decent entry-level camera with a lens and a memory card and maybe a bag. And then the next step I realize is a fairly reasonable step. You know, you're looking around $1,500 to $2,500, maybe even $3,000 for a more intermediate level camera, but you know, maybe you're getting a lot more quality in certain aspects or a better lens, etc. But they're the kind of cameras you can buy. Like I said, the next video is going to be on settings. We're going to grab one of these entry-level cameras. We're not going to use my pro one. We're going to go out to the beach or whatever the scene is, and we're going to take some really good photos with these entry-level cameras, and I'm going to show you guys how to use them in manual. So watch out for that. I'll see you guys in the next video.